believe in the gun. And our players don't use it most days. They use it every day.
In my 20 years as head coach, I've used the gun every single year. Well, my dream as a coach that everybody would grow up with the gun, because getting all those reps would make my job a lot easier.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to introduce our next speaker, but before we do that, I'd like to welcome you all to the NABC Championship webinar series. My name is Tom McDonald. I'm the Board of Directors, 2-year college coach representative, and I also worked with Championship Productions for like 20 years. Special thanks to the NABC staff, Jim Haney, Reggie Mitten, Troy Hilton, Eric Weiberg, and some Mark and Wade that sat in today and helped out. And then all of the staff, I mean, they're unbelievable in every way, from membership to social media. They've been greatly appreciated, all the efforts they put in. The Gun for being the sponsor, helping make this happen. Our numbers are off the charts. And to all these coaches that are at home or quarantined or traveling, wherever you're at, and have the opportunity to tune in to our webinars, we're glad to have you. NABC and Championship Productions are really, really fortunate and happy that you all can be on. Sideline Interactive is going to give away a one table, 8 feet, LED, free shipping. It's worth more than $11,000. Somebody's going to get that later on. Craig Reed from KBA has been providing clipboards, marker boards, magnetic boards to these coaches that are quarantined at home, that can't get to their office and can't diagram stuff or don't have their video stuff there. Mike Bray, past president of the NABC, he's been unbelievably supportive and encouraging to get this stuff done. And Jamie Dixon, who's now the president, and all the coaches that are board of directors on the board of directors on the side of social media, on the side of just encouraging and also being a part in their time and efforts. Bill Bergen, Championship Productions, Nate Landis, Daryl Bennett. So all the thanks, and I'm glad you're all on, and stay safe, like Coach Rhodes said. Before I introduce Dr. John Tower to everyone, his credentials, he's among the Division III men's basketball coaches, the second fastest in history to reach 100 wins. And then also to have more than games in the first 5 seasons any coach in Division III. His winning percentage is 796, so 80%. Some of the key points: won 2 national championships, 2011 and 2016, 2 other top 5 finishes, won an unprecedented 12 consecutive conference championships, made 12 consecutive NCAA appearances from 2005 to 17. Overall winning record of 3-14-65, 83% winning percentage. As a conference regular season record of 247-42, 86% winning percentage. The other thing that's really, I say it to every coach that gets on, but it's nice. He's been a member of the NABC for 8 years. He's unbelievable on the court as a speaker and in clinics, and he's always willing to help, and we're always happy to have him. So with that, a warm welcome to Dr. John Tower from St. Thomas, and thanks for being with us, Coach.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Great to be here.
My first question is this: you've been St. Thomas for a little while as an assistant, as a player, and then now as a professor and a coach. Can you kind of talk to me about, maybe your high school, maybe when you got to St. Thomas as the coach was there then, and then when you were an assistant, and then now, how's that journey been? What's it been like? And what kind of things? Well, we had Jamie Dixon. We got Ben McCullum next who's coached and played at their alma mater. Can you talk about that? But just the journey, the importance of education, and then I got a couple more for you, and then I'll turn you loose.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. First off, I love the series. Has been great to watch. So many outstanding coaches, and I know during this time when everyone's trying to stay safe, healthy, etc., I think this has been a welcome respite for all of us to keep learning, and that's sort of one of the themes of my remarks today is how can we be adaptable? And certainly this COVID crisis is forcing us to do that in ways that are pretty unprecedented. As a kid growing up, my dad, he ran mutual funds, but he also coached 8th grade boys basketball. And so I really go back to how I fell in love with the game. I was listening to Mike Rhodes talk earlier. So often it goes back to being that kid in the gym all by yourself. And he coached 8th graders, which to me, when I was 6 years old, that was the coolest thing in the world. And so I lived in a gym with him. We'd go every night after dinner. He'd coach his team. I was fortunate to play on a state championship team in high school at Cretin-Derham Hall under Coach Hariza. And I was blessed throughout to play with so many great teammates and for unbelievable coaches. Here at St. Thomas, Steve Fritz was here 51 years. So he was here as a player, assistant coach, head coach. And so I played for Steve for 4 years, was an assistant to him for 11 years, and then have been the head coach for the past 9 years. So it's been an amazing run at St. Thomas. It was a place that was all male in the 70s and went co-ed, and then it became a university, and then we opened a law school and a school of engineering, and now a 2-year college. And so the changes and adaptability that I think St. Thomas has shown, certainly before I was here and during this time, I think have been one of the hallmarks of the institution. I think the other part of my background that's been fun and interesting for me is to go to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin. And I worked under Judy Harakevich, who was just like another great coach. She may have been tougher than some of my basketball coaches when we were running research studies and trying to publish papers. But that got me into teaching. And I had the chance, Coach Bennett, Dick Bennett was there from 95 to 2000, which those were the 5 years I was there. And so I got a chance to watch him coach, even though I wasn't coaching at that time. I just finished playing. I got a chance to watch him coach and implement his system coming from Green Bay and learned a tremendous amount there. And so even though I had a feeling I wanted to coach, and I've always felt that really teachers can learn from coaches and coaches can learn from teachers. And I'm very blessed to do it at an institution, to do both of those things that I really enjoy.
Coach, my question to you, I know maybe you can't talk much about it, but you're also making a huge transition to Division I over the next number of years. I don't know how much you can talk about that, but what's in your mind? What's spinning in your mind thinking, I got to get done over the next number of years?
Yeah, well, that could be a different adaptability talk, several years from now when we're through this transition. But yeah, as you know, we were removed from our conference, and so we're playing in the MIAC. We just finished a season in the Sweet 16, and we were all set to play at St. John's in the Sweet 16 when our season ended. Next year will be our last year in the MIAC, and then we're awaiting word from the NCAA, which an article just came out that they will be meeting in June to discuss it. So to be honest, I don't know much more about that, but we're certainly excited about the future at St. Thomas. As we always talk with our players, you control what you can, and that was one of my mantras to them this year is, we can't control all the stuff that's happening in our conference or where we're going to land, but we can have the best season possible. And I thought our guys this year did an outstanding job of that.
So let me ask you this. You were Sweet 16, getting ready to play, and the call comes, notification. How do you as a coach, this is adversity. So how did you and your staff, how to cope with the team? What was it like and what'd you do?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, there are certain things as a coach you're prepared for. When you've coached long enough, you're used to the end of the season locker room with a lot of tears and a lot of hugs. And not that you ever get good at that speech, but you kind of anticipate that. We've been fortunate twice to win the national title in this last decade. And then this year, that was a talk that, frankly, you're not prepared to give. As the dominoes started falling that week, I think everybody had a sense that, well, for example, on Wednesday, tickets went for sale for our game, Tom, and online they sold out in, I think, 13 minutes. So it went from being a sellout on Wednesday to Wednesday night, it was families only. And then Thursday, we were headed down to film with the team when we got word. And so we had probably 3 minutes to sort of gather our thoughts and probably wish I had more time. But I think the three themes that you try to get young people to understand in athletics, number one, be smart, be safe, be healthy. Number two, support your teammates the way you always have, because this is going to be a tough transition, and we need to be really diligent about how safe we stay. But then the third thing is try to step back and take joy in the season we did have, because It didn't end necessarily the way we wanted, but when you have a little distance from it and you look back at what our guys did accomplish, I hope they take that to heart. So those were the three messages you try to impart, but I'll tell you, your heart breaks for them. I mean, I know my heart was aching personally, but then you put yourself in the shoes of our four seniors, and to have their careers end that way is pretty tough stuff. And I'm proud of how they've handled it.
All right. So let me ask you this, since you're going to talk about team building, chemistry, how do you implement your culture to your team?
Well, I think culture, it's an interesting word because it's become really ubiquitous in our society. And I remember my first year teaching here at St. Thomas, I was teaching a course in cross-cultural psychology at the time. So at that time, I was a full-time psych prof and part-time assistant coach. The enrollment in that cross-cultural psychology was a whopping total of 6 students. And that might be an indictment of my teaching and their expectations, but I think it was also like that word wasn't used nearly as often. And so I sort of immersed myself, because I had never taught the class, so I immersed myself in defining culture and building culture. And I think I'll tell you this, the toughest exercise we did in that class was defining culture. We'd spend an entire week on it. And so it's sort of this amorphous concept that when you try to define it, it's difficult to do. Some of it's tangible because it's the people, it's the things, but some of it's intangible, the traditions, the legacy before you. Some of it's where you play. And so I don't know if that's a great answer other than to say, I think culture is incredibly important, yet it's difficult to quantify. And I think when you walk in a gym, you know when a team has good culture, you can see the way coaches and players interact. If you watch them on a court, you can tell it. But it is difficult because it's from 1 to 50, and some cultures are vertical and some are horizontal and everything in between. And so it's incredibly important, but really, really tough to measure. I think sometimes it's easier, kind of like when you're sick, you can tell when it's not working and you notice that more than you do when it's working, because then things are kind of humming along.
I'm going to throw a curveball at you. You ready?
Yeah.
There's 10 seconds left in the game, right? And you're on defense. You're up by 3. They're dribbling down the court. What are you going to do?
Oh, did somebody plant this question with you?
No, it's a Hubie Brown question.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you this. If you've watched our program the last 20 years, we play man-to-man probably 99.9% of the time. This year we played zone against Platteville in our second round game. We were on the road. They were a great team. And there was 42 seconds left. But we actually went to a zone, which probably some of our fans nearly passed out. We don't ever do that. And we did it for about 4 reasons. I would say generally we have been we're going to play you straight up. We're not going to follow you and put you at the line. Some of that is we're pretty undersized. So our 6'4" posts on the defensive glass, I don't always love our chances there. And I also like having the ball at the end, knowing, hey, if they do hit a 3, we're going to get a chance to score. So we went zone though this year, which we've never done before. And I don't know if we'll ever do it again in the biggest possession of the year. And we gave up an open 3 that missed.
Nice. All right, I'm going to turn over to you right now, Coach, and I think people are really going to enjoy it. So with that, I'm going to introduce again, Coach, and you got team building, chemistry, you got everything. So non-negotiables. Have a good time. And I'll be following coaches. If you have questions, just send them in, and I'll break into Coach once in a while and ask him the questions. Thanks again, Coach.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate working with you guys always. And anybody who has questions after the presentation, feel free to contact me. Here's my email. I've enjoyed this series. I know in a lot of ways, some of it is just hearing fresh ideas. And part of what we're going to talk about today is adaptability. So our goals, we're going to talk a little bit about our UST, what we value, our philosophy. We're not going to show film today. This is going to be, as Tom alluded, more about culture. How do you try to build something that's special, that's sustainable? We're going to talk about being adaptable. I think as coaches, I know most of the people listening are high school coaches, being adaptable and knowing that there may not be a system year over year that you can rely on, but much more going into each year. Who are the players on the team? How have they grown and developed? And be willing to adapt and be flexible. Our non-negotiables. So those things that we just won't bend on. And quite frankly, I think that list should be pretty small. I'll get to that later, but I think being adaptable covers a wide range of topics within basketball. I think the non-negotiables for players to really know what you're going to demand are critical. And then if we have time at the end, we're going to talk about ethics, which I think certainly permeates everything that we're talking about, whether it's the changes that you make in treating people in an ethical way, upholding the standards of the game, but also your non-negotiables. In my mind, those very much stem from an ethical view of the world about what do we value, who do we value, how do we want to treat other people, how do we want to treat our teammates. So I'm going to run through a bunch of stuff again. I'm happy to share this with you after the fact. Basic philosophy at St. Thomas, our mission statement: faith, family, academics, athletics. Honor the first two, excel in the last two. First two are really important, that athletics doesn't work if somebody's faith life, their family life, their academics aren't in order. And so those things have to be squared away. Basketball might be the highlight of the day, but it can't be the most important thing of the day. Our vision, if you ever watched us play, I would hope you would see that we have talented guys that have a bond, that they're willing to work tirelessly towards a common goal. And as a program, we try to have three big buckets. One of them is a national goal of being one of the top 10 teams in the country, so somewhere in the top 2 to 3%. One of them is win our conference, the MIAC Minnesota Intercollegiate Athletic Conference, which has 11 teams and is one of the stronger Division III conferences in the country. And finally, and probably most important, to graduate players ready to go out in the world who are curious, they're passionate, they're energetic, and they want to help advance the common good. So some of our progress, we've had a good run, as Tom talked about. We've been fortunate to win a couple national titles. 14 of the last 15 years, we've been in the national tournament, and we've either won or shared the regular season title 14 of the last 15 years. And I want to link that back to some of our goals here momentarily. But if you look at what we've been able to accomplish, in large part, that I think is going to be because of, number one, getting talented players. Let's not forget that that is first and foremost. You can't be great without that. But I think also being adaptable and having some strong core principles that are not negotiable. So 3 goals for our players. First one, dare to be great. And I think having a vision for young people is so incredibly important. That our program's been around over 100 years. We've won the national title twice, which means we've lost it over 100 times. It's critical to me that at the start of a year, we can say this is one of our goals. It's not our only goal, but we want to be the best Division III team out of 425 teams in the country, and make no bones about it. Now, when it works, it looks like this, and that's pretty awesome. You see, and you know, I listen to some of the other speakers. I'm probably not going to have guys that you know all their names. I'm going to reference them by name, and by the end of the talk, a couple of them you may know. But Tommy Hannon there, who's to our left on the trophy, he's holding that. You see what he looks like after being first in the country. There's Tommy Hannon after being third in the country his senior year. So daring to be great has its risks. The reward is right here. The risk is you're going to feel lousy, and that's okay. To me, being in a locker room of guys who are willing to put it all on the line and end up third, I can live with that any day when they're willing to make that one of their goals. Here's Grant Schaefer. He was our All-American point guard on the 2016 national title team. What people forget, the pain of losing. There's Grant at the end of his sophomore year. So his sophomore year, we're ranked 3rd in the country, and we lose on a buzzer beater in the first round, ended up on ESPN. There's his senior year, and again, career ends on a buzzer beater on SportsCenter. So his last 3 years, one of them was a national title that everybody remembers, but the other 2 bookends were him having his heart broken and our team having our heart broken at the buzzer. And that's March Madness. That's why we love it. And as coaches, I think whatever level, I don't care if it's AAU, high school, college, when you're talking about that moment you're striving for, knowing that more often than not as a coach, the end of our season is going to be consoling a guy or a young woman who's just given everything that they have. Our second goal, sustainable excellence. Aristotle said excellence is not an act, but a habit. And this to me is more important. Daring to be great is an important vision, but having the idea that we want to be great year over year over year, and not just that, but day after day after day after day, that we're going to get everybody's best shot. If our guys come out and they're not ready to play on any given night, we're going to be in real trouble. And so that mantra in life, that I hope our players graduate where for the next 40 years, at whatever they're passionate, their families, their jobs, their hobbies, they grind day after day after day. And that's more important than having 3 magical weeks in March. 3 magical weeks at work, and then you check out and tell your boss that you're going to take a little time off doesn't fly very well. Sustainable excellence and growth and progress does. We use an acronym, INCHES, which I had more time, I'd get into more detail, but essentially it's getting an inch better every day. There's lots of versions of this. We try to tell our guys, if you do that for 4 years, for 365 days, at the end of 1,460 days, you're going to have something special. Our third goal, annual Kant's categorical imperative. Get into a little philosophy here. I remember having to memorize this as a sophomore at St. Thomas, and it always stuck with me that talking about universal behaviors and really being a great person, I ought not to act except in such a way that I can also will that my actions should become a universal law. If we treat others the way we want to be treated, and on the court, that means I always make the right decision. That if I'm a great shooter and I haven't shot today, if there's a great guy who's a great shooter who's wide open, he gets the ball every single time. I'm supposed to sprint to the rim, I run to the rim in a straight line every single time, and we do our job, and that's going to build into our DNA and our program. Now, DNA, if you took biology, I struggled in biology more than any other course I ever took. And so I think, that made a lasting impression. Certain things you fail at. I still remember the 2 words I misspelled in my grade school spelling bee. I still remember certain things from biology, even though I didn't do very well in it. And so ACTG, they help make up DNA. Those are the 4 components. In our culture, they represent 4 really important variables. And I'm going to talk more about adaptability today, but I do want to also highlight curiosity. I think is really important, that as coaches, we should know more than our players. That can lead us to get preachy. It's important, I think, to have players have ownership. It doesn't mean the players run the team, but I think they need to have a voice. We want them to have a growth mindset. So I'm going to mention about 5 or 6 books today that have been really instrumental and foundational in my beliefs as a coach. Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, is certainly one of them. Players trusting each other, trusting coaches, coaches trusting players. Trust is not a one-way street. It's not a two-way street. It's like one of those intersections where you got about 8 different streets converging, because really, if you don't have everyone trusting, from the administration to the players to the coaches to the athletic trainers and everyone in between, it's difficult to have a great program. And then the last part is gratitude, making sure that our players understand how fortunate they are to be on a competitive intercollegiate team. So let's focus on adaptability for a little while. Why adaptability? John Wooden said that this is being able to adjust to any situation at any given time. And certainly he was noted for being willing to try different things. He had non-negotiables, but he also had a lot of things that he was willing to bend on, understanding the power of giving people choice. Darwin, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, not the most intelligent, it's the one that's most adaptable to change. And I think this is critical in basketball. It's easy to look at, in whether it's high school tryouts, college recruiting, NBA, WNBA, to think there's the player who runs the fastest, who jumps the highest, who looks the strongest. Those don't necessarily always translate, and we have to be willing to adapt. I know everybody watched the Last Dance probably on Sunday evening, and I think what's fascinating is when you watch games from the 70s, the 80s. I grew up, the Seattle Supersonics were my favorite team, or my first team that I loved, with downtown Freddie Brown. And that team in 1979 had an impact on me, and then the Lakers, and then the Bulls. But when you watch the game in the 90s, it looks different than it is today. And if people aren't willing to adapt and they dig their heels and say, this is the way we've always done it, it's hard in just about any industry. When you think about coaching and different adaptations, if we bring in a little more biology in the animal kingdom, you think about what players try to do on the court. They try to camouflage different things, whether it's a shot fake, whether it's a jab step, whether it's trying to hide behind a screen. That's in some ways like a chameleon camouflaging itself. I found this a snowy owl adaptation. This is allowing owls to approach their prey without alerting. The best example I've ever seen of that, how about LeBron James a few years ago in Game 7, 2 minutes left, and if you look at where he was at the start of the play and how essentially he wasn't noticed by Iguodala until it was too late, essentially this is what our players are doing on the basketball court, is trying to adapt continuously. Now, institutionally, this is important. I talked earlier with Tom about all the myriad changes St. Thomas has gone through over the last 40 years, and that we continue in our transition. You have to be at an institution that believes in that. And our athletic director, Phil Eston, is incredible. Our president, Julie Sullivan, knowing that you have people in the administration who are both supportive of intercollegiate athletics, but also who understand the critical role in development that student athletes can undertake is really important. With our lives as basketball coaches, I think as a program, the things that we have to be adaptable to, different personnel. And I'm going to talk about some of the changes we've made and give you concrete examples that, while you may not know anything about our team, I think it may resonate in terms of who do we have on the court for us? Who's our personnel? Unexpected twists in a season, whether it's injuries, whether it's somebody doesn't turn out as well as you think, maybe it's somebody who you didn't think was going to play and ends up playing. How can you be open-minded within a season or within a game to go do that? And Tom, we were talking about playing zone. My assistant coaches who are outstanding at St. Thomas, Mike Keating runs our defense, and then Josh Rodenbiker, Tim Jarmus, and Will DeBerg. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention all of them. But Mike runs our defense, and when we went to zone near the end of that playoff game, I don't think any of our players expected that necessarily. We had worked on it, and it wasn't necessarily the right decision. If a guy hits a three, we're probably second guessed, but it's being willing to say, here are all the reasons why we want to go zone at this point in time, and ultimately we want to prepare our players for life. Some of the things that over the years we've been adaptable with. How deep are we? So for years at St. Thomas, we played probably 6 to 7 guys. The tempo was relatively slow, more of a half-court grinded out game. And I'd say for most of the 80s, 90s, and even through about 2007, that was the way we played. We didn't full court pressure, which we've done quite a bit in the last decade. Switching screens. What are you doing with ball screens, off ball screens? Are you a motion team? Do you run sets? What do you emphasize? Are you a post-dominated team? Do you shoot a lot of threes? Do you have great balance in terms of an inside-outside game? Is it one player who's doing the majority of the scoring, or is it a lot of players? And we've tended to try to go with a much more equal opportunity approach. I think we went about 10 or 11 years straight without anybody on our team averaging 15 points a game, which to me is great. Now, we probably lose some recruits every year because you're just probably not going to score 25 a game in our system. However, you are going to have a chance to play with other guys, and I think it makes it difficult to guard when we have 6, 7, 8, 9 guys who all are willing to play defense, pressure, move the ball, and play together. Another book that's been really important and instrumental to me, Outliers. Malcolm Gladwell has several New York Times bestsellers, and this one talks about the story of success, and to me it's really about excellence. I think he talks about, and I'm paraphrasing, but you need to have talent to be successful. You need to have a ton of passion. Rarely do you see somebody in life who isn't highly motivated, and that's what my grad school and most of my research the last 20 years has been on. But the third part is opportunity and seizing opportunity and being, I don't know if I'd say being at the right place at the right time. Sometimes it's that, but sometimes it's making where you are the right place at the right time. And it's easy, I think, today in this world for kids to look to transfer and coaches to change jobs, and there are legitimate reasons for that. But I also think Gladwell points out that when you look at people who are truly successful at the extremes in the world, typically they're in a situation that then allows their talent and their passion to take over. If you were unfortunate enough to be in one of my stats courses that I've taught over the years, you'd see a lot of these. And I think this is a useful metaphor for making decisions. Now, we don't make our players calculate standard deviations necessarily, but I will say as coaches, these are the easy decisions, right? If you're looking at your team and you've got 10 guys and they can all fly around, it's probably going to be easy to say, let's play all 10 and press. On the other hand, over here, what if you've got 5 really good players, but you don't have depth and they're not overly athletic? Probably it's going to be easy to let's walk the ball up the court and pack it in. What's more difficult? Well, most of the world is in these gray areas. And so the interesting thing about coaching is we're operating in this gray, yet at the end of the day, when we make a decision, no different than voting in an election, I'm not going to get political, but when we vote in an election, we may be torn and say, well, this candidate has A, B, and C, this candidate has D, E, and F, but I need to vote. I don't give a half a vote. I give a full vote. So when we're deciding, are we going to press? Are we not? Are we switching screens? Are we not? We playing 9 guys? We playing 6 guys? Are we running on offense? Are we not? Those decisions end up getting dichotomized, even though the world we live in is very gray. And I think it's important as coaches, because players can think we're speaking out of both sides of our mouths, to tell them how much we value adaptability. One of the things we promise them, we will always try to put them and our team in the best position to win. That doesn't mean it's always going to shake out the way a player wants, but we'll always do what we think is best for them and the team, both in the short term and the long term. And that's not easy to do all those things at once. But we also do want them to know that we make mistakes. And there are times where you're in this gray area where we go left and we should have gone right, and hindsight is 20/20. And so I think being adaptable, one of the risks is we're going to make decisions that don't always turn out, but it is going to allow our players to see the world broadly. And that's, to me, that's imperative, that they see the world as not a black and white world. It's a world with lots of shades of gray. Okay. Tom, any questions, anything before we move on to how we change and how we adapt?
Yep, you ready? Well, first of all, Coach, are you okay getting this presentation out where people can have it or see it?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you send it to us, we can do that. Question for Dr. Tower. As a professor of psychology and a head coach, what are some books that are must read, must reads for coaches?
Yeah, I'll tell you, most of what I read, I find, so this is I'll try and make the story short. I wanted to go into sports psychology. I wasn't very educated myself, so I ended up going to a social psych program, which ended up being far more marketable because most schools don't have a sports psychologist. Every school has a social psychologist. And so I end up reading a lot more social psych work that isn't necessarily written by coaches or directly for coaches, but that we can generalize. So for example, Outliers that I just talked about, I think Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, is a great one. I think the Freakonomics series, and there are so many good podcasts, but I think that in terms of forcing our brains to think more creatively and broadly. So those would be three that come to mind, but I really, when I'm trying to read, I'm usually looking for something that's nonfiction, that's more in the social sciences, behavioral finance, decision-making, motivation, because as coaches, we really are, we're part decision maker, part economist, part motivator, part inspiration, part analytics. And so I try to, rather than just read coaching books, try to really look across disciplines at the most popular books in those fields.
My next question is, what do you do for a player whose confidence is shaken?
That is really hard. And that's because I have not always been successful with that. I think as coaches, if there were a light switch, we would all do it. And as I alluded to just a couple minutes ago, we're always going to try and do the right thing for the player and the team in the short term and the long term, but doing what's best for that player's confidence in the short term might not be the best for the team in the long term. And so I think when players' confidence is shaken, part of it is trying to get at the root of that. Is that because performance is down? Is it something socially with the team? Because sometimes confidence is related to performance, other times it's not. But I think more than anything, each individual is different. So I don't think there's a blanket solution or fix. But I think talking to players one-on-one and figuring out, for example, if it's a shooter, I'm generally going to go with just keep shooting if I know this player is a great shooter. If they're not a great shooter, then it might be, well, you're not confident for a reason, right? The old adage, you're open for a reason in games. Then it might be trying to say, hey, the reason you might not be confident is maybe this isn't a skill that you need to demonstrate right now in front of a big crowd. Let's just go defend and rebound and pass the ball. So I think that would be the way I'd approach it, was trying to figure out, is the lacking confidence something that's just a blip on the radar and statistically is an anomaly? Or is this something that probably we just have to scale back what this player is trying to do?
Coach, let me ask you one more and then I'll let you get back to work. That player who is struggling offensively, free throw line, I mean, I know this is, but those free throw guys that get that little, I can't make it, they're shooting 22% from the free throw line. You see it in the NBA even. What would you do? How would you try to help with that situation?
Well, you know, and I go back when I talked about our DNA, the fourth one was trust, right? Adaptability, curiosity, gratitude, and trust. Or the third one was trust. And I think at the end of the day, there are certain mechanics that we need present with shooting, right? And each coach may have slightly different ones, but if you talk about balance and you talk about follow through and where your eyes are, and is a guy mechanically doing the right thing, or is a young woman doing the right thing? I think free throws, and again, this is me, 2016, if you look at how our team was shooting free throws early in the year, we lost a couple of games in part because of shooting free throws. poorly, and we probably overreacted at a certain point, and we started shooting more in practice, and we started talking about it more, and frankly, I think we got worse. And then at some point in the season, I said, just stop. Like, we've got great three-point shooters on this team. There's no reason they can't shoot free throws well. So we stopped talking about it. And if you look at our 6 games in the national tournament, I think we were either at 80% or right around 80% for 6 games, shooting a lot of attempts. And so afterwards, everybody wanted to know, what'd you guys do differently? And all I could say is I stopped coaching. I stopped talking about free throws because I think I was screwing it up more. Now, I do think there's some confidence where you just tell people, look, trust over time. If you shoot a lot of free throws, you're going to make 80% of your free throws if you're a great shooter. But you might go 1 for 2 back-to-back games, and now all of a sudden you're not shooting a lot. And so free throws, to me, I don't like to talk about them a whole lot, in part because the other way is, let's say we shoot 20 a game. Well, the difference between 75% per game, let's say 80% per game to make the numbers a little easier. 80% a game, we go 16 to 20. 70%, we go 14 to 20. So that's 2 points. That's not trivial. What I'm telling you is, number one, I'm not convinced I can change those 2 points that easily. And number two, there may be other things in practice that, quite frankly, if we sprint our butt back on defense every single possession, I'm always amazed at how many points that's worth for our team. Those games where we get beat, usually we go back and watch the film and we say, oh, we gave up 40 points in the paint tonight. Let's not do that again. And so if we just get really tough-minded on getting back in defense, getting our defense set, not giving up layups, that to me is worth more than possibly getting 2 more points in the free throw line. And I know that may not be a popular view of it, but we always talk about major on the majors and where are the big places we can improve.
Coach, I'm going to let you get back to work.
All right, thank you.
It's, I would say we got 10 minutes left, 10 to 12, 14 maybe.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Coach.
With behavior change, how are we going to adapt? Three things have to be present. The first is the person changing or the team changing has to know we're going to change and we're willing to. The second is we have to be capable, and typically as humans, we're far more capable of change than maybe we demonstrated would like to believe. It's not always easy, but if we want a guy to go over a ball screen, he can go over a ball screen. It might not be as quick as we'd like him to, but he can go over a ball screen. The third and the key, and this is really what led me to go to grad school to study motivation, is to understand how do you get people to actually want to. And there are different drivers. For some people, it's going to be individual accolades. It might be scoring. For some people, it might be the team. For some, it might be family related. For some, it might be, I just want to do the right thing. For some, it's a work ethic they've grown up with. But these 3 things, when they're present, we can change. And so when I look at adaptability, a couple books I'd recommend. One is Quantum Change, which takes a look at drastic changes in life. These are not gradual. These are drastic changes in life. And then there's other great books. Atomic Habits by James Clear is one that talks about how do you get a little bit better each day? How do you change a little bit that's based in science? And so I think there are different ways that people can change, and it depends a little bit on the person and the situation. But when I look at change, best example I can give you from our program, that guy on the left there was a junior in high school and got cut from not his varsity, but his junior varsity team, which is not easy to do. Most of the time when you ask a high school coach, tell me about the last kid on your JV, invariably they will tell you, oh, he is the greatest kid. So the guy on the left was not as good as that kid who wasn't very good at basketball, but was a great kid. 4 years later, that's Tommy Hannon. Now, he went from a 6'1", 262-pound kid to a 6'6", 200-pound kid. His best friends in high school were all future scholarship football players. Came to St. Thomas, played on our JV as a freshman, and had played a little bit on his high school team as a senior. So the beauty of this story, I think, for all the high school coaches is this is a kid who was a junior in high school and didn't make the JV. And he came back the next year and had lost over 50 pounds. He had grown 5 inches, which helped. And he got so good that the coach said, we're going to put you on the JV. And Tommy was thrilled because he wasn't on the JV the year before. He was fortunate to be surrounded by really good friends. Some of the guys in the photo in high school, John Nance, who went on to be a star player for us, also played quarterback at the University of Minnesota. Michael Floyd, who played a long time in the NFL. they looked at him and said, Tommy, look at the reality is we're pretty talented athletes and we work hard. You don't do either. And so here's Tommy, and 4 years later, he's all Final Four team, wins the national title. This is the same guy I showed you at the start of the presentation. He was also a senior All-American who was on the #1 team in the country that got beaten the Final Four. He ends up playing overseas in New Zealand and has had a remarkable career in business already, only 7 years out of school. But again, where does that start? To me as a coach, his coaches in high school were adaptable, and they said, hey, he's improved. It also comes from family. One of the coolest stories I've been a part of at St. Thomas, these are Tommy's younger brothers, Kevin and Michael. And we had a Hannon in our program for 11 straight years. It ended in 2019, but 11 straight years we had a Hannon. And when you look at why Tommy improved and why his brothers had such great work ethics, I would argue a lot of it was their parents. I wrote a book a few years ago called Why Less is More for Wasps, well-intentioned, over-involved sports parents. And I know if you're a high school coach, you don't have any overly involved sports parents at your school, but other schools may. I'm saying that in jest. I think this is a huge issue in society because Tommy would not have become this guy without his parents also telling him the reason you got cut was you weren't good enough. Now get off the couch, stop eating Doritos, stop drinking Mountain Dew, get outside and play. And Tommy did that. And his parents' credit, Jim and Sue, they put him in a loving context where they said, look, we don't love you any differently, but if you want this, you have to work to get it. And I think so often our young people need to hear that message. So adaptations that I talked about earlier, we played pretty slow for a long, long time, and there was nothing good or bad about that, but I just want to point out that's how we played. That changed. These three guys graduated. 3 All-Americans. The middle one is my top assistant, Mike Keating. And they graduated, and we had a young team, and we ended up playing much more up-tempo for the first time in a long time. And the way that really started, we were playing a game against Winona State. It was in the middle of a Division II dynasty. And here we are playing on the road, and we're down 10 with 2 minutes left. And we had never pressed before. And we looked up at the scoreboard, and our head coach, Steve Fritz, at the time said, what do you think? He said, well, why don't we try a press? We don't have a press. So we called a timeout. We tried to press. We ended up coming back and beating Winona State, who went on to win the national title that year. They went 38-1 in 2008. And so that was, for me, as a relatively young coach, an aha moment that if this worked for 2 minutes against Winona State, it probably isn't going to work quite that magically, but maybe we ought to be doing that more often. And so then we did that for about 8 years, and we kind of got stubborn with that, where we're living in the gray more, and we got a little, frankly, probably more talented at the high end and not quite as quick and not quite as deep. And so we had to slow it down. And we slowed it down for about 3 years, which was not easy. Again, it took explaining to our players, listen, we're not pressing anymore, not because we don't think you're good. We're not pressing because we don't think the 7 of you, 3 of whom are not the fastest afoot, are going to fit well with that system. And so now the last 2 years, we've been back to playing much more up-tempo, playing 10 guys. And the thing I try to, and I'm going to get into our non-negotiables here, but the thing I try to tell our guys is this: I want them to play as fast as they can, have as much fun playing together as they can, as long as they take care of the ball and they're unselfish. And so the last 2 years, we've shot more three-point attempts. It's not even close compared to what we've shot in the past. And some of that is by design, but a lot of it is based on our personnel, that we don't have a 6'9" All-American center, but we have a lot of guys who are 5'11", maybe 5'10" to 6'4", who can all really shoot it. So non-negotiables at UST. Keep it simple, keep it short. I think this list has to be pretty brief, and we'll open it up for questions again in a few minutes. But to keep it brief, here it is. Value the ball. First and foremost, you have to value the ball. If you want to play for us, and I'm not telling you these have to be your non-negotiables, but you have to know some of the best advice I got from my head coach in college, Steve Fritz, when we coached together. He said, listen, you're not me, I'm not you, you have to be yourself. And we were different people in some ways. We believed in a lot of the same things. Valuing the ball to me is incredibly important because of what it represents. And so you have to value the ball. Here's over the last 12 seasons where we've been turnover-wise. You can see our record in parentheses. You can see this year we were first in the nation in fewest turnovers, the previous year second, top 10, 5 of the last 6, top 20, 11 of the last 20. And what I like most is we're probably playing faster now than we've ever played, yet we're turning it over less. Now, some of that might be we just shoot it before we turn it over. But if you look at the way our guys buy into playing, we want to play really fast, really unselfishly, while valuing the ball. Second thing is to value your teammates. Get great joy from what your teammates are doing, what they're accomplishing. And this is one of my favorite pictures in our program's history. This is a game from about a decade ago that was on the cover of the newspaper, and it was beautiful because this was the number one ranked team in the country, and this was after a dunk by a reserve, and that's how excited all the starters were. To me, that's why when Tom asked about culture at the start, this team had as good a culture in 2009 as any we've ever had. I don't know how you bottle it up because a lot of it is just the organic relationships between the players and friendships and the style of play. But when you have guys getting that excited over another teammate's success, you have something special. How do you do these non-negotiables? I think there's 5 parts: teach it, demonstrate it; 6 parts: rep it, live rep it, emphasize it, and then at the end of the day, demand it. That if I say we better not turn the ball over, turn the ball over. It's not that I'm going to yank you that minute, but it's going to be difficult to be in our rotation if you turn the ball over a lot. We always talk about players. They've got to be better than their problems, whatever problems they bring to the table. Well, you have to be better than your turnovers on offense. So this year, for example, we had a player, Ryan Lindbergh, who he had 53 assists for the year and only 10 turnovers. And coming out of high school, he was an incredible shooter. That's what he was known for. He played more minutes than anybody on our team this year. He scored 6.5 points a game, and his shooting numbers were good but not great. And so some people probably watched and they thought, why is he playing more than some of your first team all-conference, all-region guys? And it's not a more or less. It's just he was in the game because he never turned it over, and he always defended and was in the right spot. And so those are the things that if we can get our guys to understand, if you want to play. I read a great tweet by a coach the other day, and it's going to escape me who tweeted it, but he said, listen, young players, if you want to play, figure out what your coach wants, and then give that to him or her. And so much of life, whatever job we're in, figure out what our boss wants, and then give that to him or her. And if we're working at the right place, that's going to all line up with our ethics. I'll wrap up, and I know, Tom, we're running short on time. Our negotiables, I also boil it down to 3 three-word phrases. Get the ball, keep the ball, score the ball. At the end of the day in basketball, it can be this easy. And this sounds like something you could teach third graders, and quite frankly, you can. That, we've run camps for 25 years here at St. Thomas. I started them actually with Bill Bergen, who has done such an incredible job with championship productions. His son Mike and I were roommates for 4 years in college. And so 25 years ago, we started running camps. I still coach AAU basketball to this day. So I've coached a 13, 14, 15, 16, now 17U team. And some people might think I have lost my mind. But what I love is I don't care if it's third graders or collegiate players or NBA or WNBA players. If you do these 3 things, get the ball, which means you defend and you rebound. Keep the ball, just like recess where you're playing keep away as a young kid. Take care of the ball and then score the ball, which means you might shoot it, but you don't have to be a great shooter. You don't have to be a great dribbler. You have to be able to pass and catch. And I've loved some of the Coach Davenport, who was on last week, I think, Tom, we talked about the lost art of passing and catching. And I think there's been so many great speakers from him to Coach Boone, and they hit on these type of topics that at the end of the day as a coach, I don't care what level it is, if our guys get the ball, keep the ball, score the ball. And then my last words before every game, it's on our locker room wall: play hard, play smart, play together, have fun. If you forget everything else we're doing, if you do those 4 things, you got to do them well, but if you play really hard, really smart, and really together with a lot of passion, we're going to probably sleep okay at night. So with that, Tom, if there are any other questions, I'm happy to take a stab at them.
In your opinion, is there truth to the self-fulfilling prophecy?
The notion of what we expect we're going to get?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Self-fulfilling prophecy. I think that's part of it in coaching, that if we think guys are going to do well, there's a lot of science behind that, right? In academic classrooms, that when we think kids are going to succeed, they're far more likely. It's not the only factor. It doesn't ensure it, but it certainly increases the likelihood.
I'll try to get this one right. Do you think classes can hinder the development of the culture of a program? Or is that me, the coach, pawning off responsibility?
And it was what, classes?
Yeah. Let's go to the next one.
Okay. I'm sorry. Whoever that is.
Me too. I thought I'd give it a run. What do you do when your best player has an attitude and not a game or a great teammate?
That is really tough. We've been fortunate where I think it's difficult to be great if your best player isn't coachable. I was listening to a podcast the other day with Jeff Van Gundy on it, and he said, if you can't coach numbers 1, 2, and 3 as hard as you can coach 10, 11, 12, you got the wrong 1, 2, and 3. And they might be your most talented players, but it's going to be really, really hard to be great. And so I think if your best player is not buying into that, that's one-on-one meetings, whether it's shot selection or hustle or attitude. But it is players, the best players are going to get more of certain things, whether it be playing time or shots. It has to be clear that they're not going to get everything that they want, and they have to demonstrate that in ways that their teammates understand it.
Dr. Tower is going to send us the presentation, and we'll send it out to everybody. So that's 2 questions. And then my other one is, how does your sports psychology and your coaching philosophy intersect? Does one take priority over the other in your decision-making? Last question.
Yeah, I've been fortunate because I'm not teaching organic chemistry, right? I'm teaching, like this morning I taught a course in motivation. So frankly, when I'm teaching motivation on one of these Zoom calls right now, we're talking about a lot of sport-related phenomenon. So I've been lucky to have it intersect where social psych is essentially group dynamics, motivation, basketball, all those things really do intersect. And so, again, I think teachers, and this is what I love about high school, is so many teachers are coaching and coaches are teaching, and I think we can learn from one another. I do think the science of education sometimes gets lost on us in college coaching. That we know the X's and O's, but what is the best way to communicate with someone? What is the best way to teach? What's the best learning method? What's the best way to give negative feedback to somebody? And so I think I feel very fortunate to have the background that I got at Wisconsin and here at St. Thomas, because I think psychology is a piece of our program. It's not all of it. And our freshmen are usually worried I can read their minds, which I can't. But it is important because at the end of the day, vertical jump and speed, those oftentimes aren't that different. What's in between the ears is what separates a lot of athletes from being elite.
Coach, in 1 minute or less, captains, how do you pick them?
Captains, you know what? We typically have the team vote on them. Coaches get votes. And so we certainly, I think it's collaborative. If everybody on a team says this guy should be one of our captains, I'm going to listen. If I don't like what they're saying, then I got other problems in my culture. If I really don't want their opinion, and I also know I might name a captain who I think is the most reliable, responsible, conscientious person, but he's not going to be the guy that gets everybody together for dinner after practice. So, I mean, this year we had 5 captains, 4 seniors and a junior. So I don't really care how many captains. We do like to have them. Partly in basketball, you got to go to the center circle before the game, but I know coaches who don't have them. That to me, I do think it's important that people know who those leaders are. But frankly, I could imagine a team with 15 captains if they all deserve it. That to me, it's always the standard that if you want to play for us, we always talk about you got to be above a certain standard. We'll play 6, 8, or 10 guys. I don't care, but you got to be above a standard. And I think that's the same thing for captainship.
I knew this would be a great presentation. Thanks for your time, Coach. And we got Ben McCollum next from Northwest Missouri State. Thanks, Coach. Have a great day.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Bye.